Hey, good morning. Good to have you with us on a Thursday. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Stephen Romo, in for Savannah Sellers today, and a lot to get to this morning. And we begin with that U-turn from President Trump as he hits the pause button on those sweeping trade tariffs less than 24 hours after they took effect. In a stunning reversal, the White House announced a 90-day freeze on tariffs for dozens of countries except for China, which now faces a tariff of 125%. That's after China raised its fee on U.S. imports to 84%. That went into effect overnight. However, the baseline tariff of 10% for everyone is still in place.
The walkback comes a week after Mr. Trump announced the measures during his so-called Liberation Day speech in the Rose Garden. The plan triggered widespread financial turmoil across global markets. Stocks plummeted amid fears the trade war could hasten an economic recession. After the pause was announced yesterday, U.S. stocks took off, closing sharply higher. All three major U.S. indices saw their biggest one-day surges in years. And that relief rally is being felt across the world this morning. Asian markets made big gains, while European stocks are currently soaring. Speaking yesterday, the president gave this reason for implementing the pause.
I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid. I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China, because they did retaliate.
In a few moments, we're going to hear from NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer, who is in Beijing. Before that, let's bring in our business and data correspondent Brian Chung and our senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. Gabe, let's start with you. Tell us why the president changed his mind on these tariffs beyond the yippee quote there. What's the official line from the White House, and how does that compare with what NBC News is actually hearing from administration officials?
Hi there, Joe. Good morning. Well, White House officials are trying to cast this as the art of the deal, even though, as you mentioned, over the past several days, they had been saying that this was not a negotiation. But according to a senior administration official, there was concern over the bond market here and Treasury bonds. The interest rates were going up, and that is highly unusual when it comes to a situation like this when the markets are dropping. And so the top officials at the White House, the top economic advisors, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, as well as Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, they presented a united front to the president and urged him to take some type of action. And that's what happened yesterday. This is Treasury Secretary Bessent speaking to reporters about how this all went down.
President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself. We've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem. Each one of these solutions is going to be bespoke. It is going to take some time, and President Trump wants to be personally involved.
Now, this was the off-ramp that the administration needed after getting increasing pressure, not just from business leaders, but also from lawmakers on Capitol Hill. You heard the president describe some of the reaction to the bond markets as people getting, quote, yippee. Well, this is something that the administration, again, had said was not in the cards several days before. The president saying yesterday it isn't a negotiation until it is. Joe.
Yeah, and Gabe, we heard that several times, that it wasn't going to disappear. It wasn't going to be paused, these tariffs. And suddenly we started hearing about the bond market, Brian, which Gabe was just talking about. Let's bring you in here. What should we know about the bond market and what effect it had on making this pause happen?
Yeah, look, when regular people are asking questions about the bond market, it's probably not a good thing. This is a market that's usually boring. It's the deepest in the world, actually. People tend to think about the U.S. stock market, but U.S. bond markets are the largest and most liquid in the world, and other countries use what bond yields are trading at in the United States to index how they should be pricing their securities. Either way, what usually happens when there's a massive stock market sell-off like we had seen in the days leading up to yesterday is that when stocks are selling off, people go and buy safe-yielding assets, which have historically been perceived to be U.S. government debt. But that didn't happen in this case. We saw stocks selling off, but investors were also dumping U.S. Treasuries. They didn't want it for some reason. So when that happens, the price goes down and the yields go up. So we saw yields go up by 0.3%, 0.4%, which is very unusual in that short amount of time for things like 10 or 30-year treasuries. That has signs of potentially breaking something. when the U.S. Treasury markets don't operate like they're supposed to, you have people that are worried about what was originally a tariff war kind of manifesting into a financial crisis. Didn't happen, but apparently that's what the White House kind of flagged to President Trump and maybe was behind the calculus to then back off of those tariffs, at least on countries not named China, in that announcement yesterday.
All right. So, Gabe, speaking of China, as mentioned, China now faces this massive 125% levy. Where does this tit for tat between the two countries go from here?
Well, that's a huge question, Joe. And frankly, we don't know over the next couple of weeks. Right now, it doesn't seem to be much open communication between the U.S. and China at this point. Top advisors to the president, including Stephen Miller, though, saying that now China is painted into a political and economic corner. And that's essentially the good news for the White House here, at least as they see it, is that they were able to back off of this tariff plan that was sparking so many concerns around the world. They have this off-ramp and now are making China out to be the bad guy. However, the president yesterday trying to say that he still respects President Xi and that he wants to get to a deal, that China wants to come to the negotiating table but doesn't know how. Still a lot of questions about how this moves forward, especially since it's not just these tariffs that the U.S. needs to talk to China about. There's also a TikTok deal in the works that right now is in jeopardy. But over the next coming days and weeks, the U.S. says that it does plan to negotiate with these 75 or so countries that have reached out, and that President Trump will take a personal stake in those negotiations, something that he normally likes to do in terms of these business negotiations. Joe and Stephen.
And, Brian, I know you've been looking at the effects the trade war with China could potentially have on prices we pay for everyday goods. What have you been finding?
Yeah, well, I know that that big headline of, lowering the temperature on the trade war with every other country essentially is kind of, all right, well, yeah, maybe that means those price increases aren't coming. But I want to point out that 25% tariff on our neighbors to North and South, Mexico and Canada, are still in place. But China, being such a large producer of things that are shipped to the United States, still remaining in place and even higher at 125%, that could lead to higher prices for everything, including toys. Take a listen.
As President Trump dialed down the temperature on tariffs around the world, the trade spat with China heated up, with the president announcing that 125% tariff.
I told him, if you retaliate, we're going to double it. And that's what I did with China, because they did retaliate.
The CEO of Basic Fun, which makes Tonka trucks and Care Bears products, said when the president proposed a 54% tariff rate on China, he knew he would have to raise prices. But now,
you might as well just make it 1,000,000,000%, because we're not shipping anything out of China. Nobody's going to be shipping anything out of China till this gets solved.
He warns what happens now will have impacts months down the line.
If you're stopping production, does this imply that you might not have stuff on the shelves for key holiday season?
Well, there likely, in particular with toys, be a shortage of toys this Christmas. I mean, even a short-term disruption will upset the flow of goods. But we still have time.
It's not just toys. Americans are surrounded by Chinese-made products, which could get more expensive. A lot of the cheap goods sold at places like Walmart and Amazon are made in China. Walking down the block, you'll see it. So many American brands selling products coming from China. Like Nike, where 18% of their footwear and 16% of their apparel are made there. Even this glasses company, which assembles some of its glasses in the United States, uses materials and manufactures in China. Some auto parts already more expensive.
There was one part that was around $280, and then 2 days later, the cost went up to like $328, and of course it was an overseas part that was manufactured in China.
President Trump also closed a loophole that allowed cheap goods from companies like Temu and Shein to avoid tariffs, so those prices also likely to go up. The concern that even as the world negotiates, China and the U.S., the two largest economies, are drifting apart.
The harm that's being caused is really catastrophic, and please make a deal quickly. There's a deal to be done, and let's go back to business as usual.
And another aspect of all of this is, of course, how any counteraction from China impacts American exporters of things. We had heard from small businesses in the United States that said, yeah, if China slaps back on retaliatory tariffs, if they ratchet up to 125, that could be impactful for their businesses as well.
All right, Brian and Gabe kicking us off this hour. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
And let's continue that conversation now and bring in NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer from Beijing. Janice, good morning to you. So we now have this back and forth focus between the U.S. and China on the tariffs. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent refused to call it a trade war yesterday, but the additional 84% tariff from China on American goods, that is now in effect. So what's the reaction where you are to these new changes in the tariffs?
The escalation has left China with this whopping 125% tariff on all exports to the U.S., and that's added to existing duties that were imposed even before President Trump took office. President Trump linked it to payback for China retaliating against his earlier trade moves. The 84% tariffs on imports went into effect here at midnight last night. And just within the last hour, China's film administration has said it's going to be reducing the number of American film imports. Hollywood movies aren't as popular as they used to be here, but they still do make money at the box office. There's also speculation that China could cut off talks on fentanyl cooperation. So we're seeing a range of retaliatory moves here. The Commerce Ministry is reiterating that China is going to fight this trade war to the end. However, they say the door to negotiation remains open. The issue is neither side wants to go through first. It's worth noting also that one of the most popular posts on Weibo today is from a Chinese diplomat who posted an old video of Chairman Mao urging people to not back down.
So, Janice, the Chinese finance ministry has called President Trump's escalation a, quote, serious violation of China's legitimate rights and interests. You seem to suggest China is ready for the long haul here. I mean, if this does go on and on, what could that mean for China and for President Xi?
You're right, Joe. There's more than just tariffs at play here. There are going to be consequences for the U.S. China relationship, where trade has always been the backbone. I spoke with Rick Waters. He's the China director at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and he's a former China coordinator for the State Department. And I asked him about the long-term impact on relations and decoupling.
The Chinese still have very deep suspicions about intentions. They act very passively in many cases. And I think we're just, in a bad marriage here that's leading towards some sort of economic divorce.
So is this decoupling?
These are trade prohibitive tariffs. So I think after we see a few more ships come to our borders just before the deadline, we're going to be in a period where this is what decoupling looks like.
China's leadership is not backing down. Officials are calling it blackmail and bullying. One official in Hong Kong called the Trump administration 21st century trade barbarians. And in many ways, China has been preparing for this for years, and Beijing's plan does not include capitulating to the White House. Joe, Stephen.
So much potential fallout. Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you.
Some of President Trump's newest and most ardent supporters are now celebrating his reversal on tariffs, but only after they began to publicly question his trade policies. NBC News White House correspondent Aaron Gilchrist takes a look at how the so-called bros who helped Mr. Trump connect with young male voters and help put him back in the White House are tracking his trade war online.
From the free market Republicans in Congress,
Whose throat do I get to choke if this proves to be wrong?
to big money CEOs voicing tariff woes. Even some of his newest fans, the podcast bros who partly powered the Trump 2024 election win, also sounding the alarm.
It's Orange Monday.
There's Dave Portnoy, the CEO of Barstool Sports, hugely popular among young men for his pizza reviews.
One bite, everyone knows rules.
And stock tips. At one point this week saying he lost something like $20 million, just minutes before Trump's turnaround on tariffs, going on CNN, clearly feeling out which way the political winds were blowing.
He's playing an extremely high-risk game of poker, and if it turns out great, it'll be a great move and one of the great things that he's done. If not, I think the voters will speak at midterms.
Then, after Trump's pause, celebrating.
What did I say? I say Trump's not crazy. I say we vote for him. Give him some time.
But Portnoy wasn't the only podcaster wavering on Trump. Take Joe Rogan.
Yes, by night, all day.
He went all in on candidate Trump, even as he promised tariffs back then.
This country can become rich with the proper use of tariffs. It'll
Did
keep
you just
companies...
float out the idea of getting rid of income taxes and replacing it with tariffs?
Well, okay.
Were you serious about that?
Yeah, sure, but why not?
Now voicing his displeasure over the trade war with some U.S. allies.
But I just want America and Canada to get along. I think it's ridiculous.
And Twitch streamers like Aiden Ross, who once gave the president a Cybertruck, wrapped with that famous picture of his assassination attempt, also revealing he was deep in the hole.
How much you lost? Be honest. 8 figures.
Even Ben Shapiro, the conservative firebrand co-founder of the Daily Wire, was openly slamming the president for his policies.
Trade wars are in fact not good and not easy to win, particularly if you don't actually have a plan.
The whole thing showing early cracks in the presidential honeymoon.
I think it's less, is he listening to them, and more, does he care about them as validators? He does need them. We live in a fragmented media environment. Young men voters get their information from a lot of these validators on the internet and social media who are creating video. And if they're starting to say Donald Trump isn't living up to his promise, I think they might retreat.
And now, as President Trump announces a pause on many of the tariffs, backing away from the brink, a potential warning that more tariff chaos could come at the expense of many who pushed him into the presidency.
Now, I'm going to look like a real idiot if he turns around by the end of the day. He's like, tariffs are back on. So I hope he don't do that.
With their millions of listeners keeping their ears peeled.
Our thanks to Aaron Gilchrist for that report. Now, division among the GOP is delaying President Trump's agenda this morning on Capitol Hill. House Speaker Mike Johnson canceled plans to vote on a Senate-approved budget resolution yesterday after a group of conservative hardliners threatened to tank the measure.
Yeah, this is a major setback for the speaker, who's hoping to pass this bill, which would advance Trump's sweeping tax cuts. He had this to say to reporters yesterday.
The equilibrium point that we're trying to reach, the consensus tonight, is what is the amount of a minimal number of cuts and savings that we can find in the budget that will satisfy everyone to move forward with this nation-shaping piece of legislation.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin joins us now from Washington with the latest on this. Julie, good morning. So what's happening behind the scenes that led to canceling this vote? What are the concessions that these conservative hardliners are pushing for?
Well, quite frankly, good morning, guys. We saw this coming because all week long, even before then, conservatives in the House were railing against the Senate-passed budget blueprint. Remember, this is the very first step for them to get on the path in what's called reconciliation. It allows either party in control, in power, to use a partisan process to basically fund the president's agenda. That's what they're trying to do here, but they just can't get on the same page. So yesterday, there was a ton of back and forth. Some of the conservatives huddled even with Senate Republican leadership. The bottom line here is they just don't trust the Senate to cut enough in the deficit, to cut enough in the debt that they want to see happen. The Senate, of course, has different political calculations than the House. House members want to cut at least $1.5 trillion from the deficit. In the Senate proposal, that number is just $4 billion. Of course, it can always go up. But certainly, especially moderate Republicans don't see how that happens without eating into entitlements. So Speaker Johnson will try again this morning, putting the bill on the floor again. If they can't get this done today, guys, it's going to be really difficult for them because, of course, they're up against a recess next week.
Something to watch out for. And Julie, we also had House Republicans using this procedural rule to prevent votes on blocking Trump's tariffs. How is Johnson defending that, and what's the reaction on the Hill?
Yeah, so the procedural rule to pass that budget plan had a little provision tucked in it that would essentially bar any member of the House, Democrat or Republican, from forcing a vote to basically pull back some of the power and levers that the president has to impose his tariffs under a national emergency. Republican leadership in the House tucking that provision in, knowing that there is a growing chorus of opposition to the president's tariff moves, as you just heard Aaron lay out there in his piece. And this will prevent any member from doing so until at least September. Johnson defending the move, saying that the president has to have the full authority to do what he needs to do with the tariffs. Of course, Trump ended up pausing those tariffs for 90 days yesterday, but still a lot of Republicans, not only Democrats. Of course, a Democrat was trying to force this measure in the House, but in the Senate, you do have a bipartisan measure from Chuck Grassley, for example, that would kind of claw back some of that authority and keep it under the legislative branch in Congress.
Julie, one more thing to talk about. Congress seeking a potential vote on the SAVE Act this week, which would make sweeping changes to voter registration. What should we know about that?
It would require anybody who wants to register to vote. Now you have to go in person. You can't do that by mail, and you have to come with a proof of citizenship, your birth certificate, your passport. Some of the arguments that critics of this, mostly Democrats, make is that this would disenfranchise, perhaps unintentionally, people who are American citizens, military members, for example, women who recently have changed their name when they got married, things like that that would make it really difficult for voters to turn around and say, listen, we can't find our passport, we're just not going to do it. On the other hand, you have Republicans who are, of course, pushing this bill. President Trump signed an executive order to this effect a couple of weeks ago, saying that this is just common sense. This is something that other countries have. We need to make sure that people prove their citizenship, their eligibility to vote to do so. Again, though, a lot of back and forth about this bill. If Republicans get enough Democrats, though, which we saw in the House they did, they got 4 Democrats last Congress. If they get enough Democrats to join them in the House and Senate, maybe it will pass. But by and large, a majority of Democrats just think that this is a non-starter.
All right, Julie Sirkin, thank you so much.
To Idaho now, where the man accused of killing 4 college students is facing an uphill battle to keep the jury from seeing certain evidence. Lawyers for Bryan Kohberger argued in court yesterday that some of the critical evidence for the prosecution should be thrown out in the case, including that 911 call. NBC News correspondent Liz Kreutz has those details.
1665. Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students, back in court. His attorneys sparring with prosecutors over what evidence should be allowed at trial.
These murders, whoever committed them, were brutal.
The judge signaling a decision on many of the requests, but ruling that prosecutors can't label Kohberger a psychopath or sociopath, and that they also can't use Kohberger's autism diagnosis to argue for a harsher punishment. Neither things prosecutors say they plan to do.
If we get to a penalty phase, we have a lot better aggravating evidence than the fact that he has level 1 autism.
Kohberger's lawyers say he has maintained his innocence since he was arrested in 2022 and charged in the murders of Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonzalez, and Madison Mogan, who were found fatally stabbed in their off-campus home. His attorneys arguing text messages from surviving roommates, their 911 call, and his alleged Amazon purchases, including a mask and a knife and knife sheath, should be excluded from trial, as well as this selfie Kohberger allegedly took hours after the murders, and the phrase bushy eyebrows, a term used by one of the surviving roommates to describe the man she saw inside the home.
The state's interpretation is that Mr. Kohberger's photo shows bushy eyebrows. That is misleading to the jury.
The judge granting the defense's request to introduce proof of potential alternative perpetrators, but saying they have to do so before trial, and also questioning Kohberger's alibi that he was driving to see the moon and stars, highlighting the lack of witnesses to back up his claim unless Kohberger takes the stand.
Liz Kreutz reporting there. Right now, it seems unlikely that Kohberger will actually take the stand in his own defense, but NBC News has learned that prosecutors plan to call members of his family to testify for that trial, which is set to begin in August.
Some April showers are headed toward the East Coast. For more details, let's take a look now at your morning News Now weather.
Yeah, meteorologist Angie Lastman joins us now. Hey, Angie.
Hi, gentlemen. And those showers, some of them include some snowflakes. Unfortunately, we are just not done with the wintry weather just yet. You can see some of that snow stretched across parts of the Great Lakes and into the interior Northeast. And yes, we've got some of that rain working across the Appalachians. This is just some of the spots that are going to see some soggy conditions through the day today, as we've got a couple of systems that we're monitoring. This first one bringing that rain and snow specifically to the Northeast, but we've also got the chance to see some of these stronger storms developing across the Tennessee Valley here as we get into the afternoon hours. That brings additional rainfall for folks there. And then by tomorrow, a quite rainy and windy day across the Northeast. We'll still see some of this lasting and stretching down into the mid-Atlantic. Travel is going to be a little difficult in this region for tomorrow, and we could potentially see some minor flooding across that region. Now, the system works offshore, but it kind of just hangs out there, and that means we've still got some of this moisture streaming in for folks across New England, falling in the form of rain and snow as we get into your Saturday. Now, here's the deal with the severe weather today. It's focused across some of those same locations that were hard hit over the past week or so. The good news is this system's going to be a quick mover, so we're not looking at a whole lot in the way of rain to worsen those flood conditions that we were monitoring all last week and even into the weekend. But we are going to see the chance for some of these stronger storms to develop. 14 million people included in this: Cape Girardeau, Memphis, Tupelo, Birmingham, and stretching out towards Atlanta, some of the major cities included. The good news is the threat for tornadoes is on the low end. We could see an isolated tornado or two, but mainly it's going to be the wind gusts and the hail that we'll watch for. Meanwhile, across the Northeast, that's where we're going to get the good soaking rain. So this is through Sunday. Notice 1 to 2 inches is the more widespread amounts across Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York, and up into Boston. We can have a couple of spots, maybe 2 inches or up to 3 inches. So we will, again, watch for the potential for some minor flooding. This is for tomorrow tomorrow, where there is a minor or marginal risk, rather, from Washington, D.C. out towards the coast, including Raleigh as well. Now, as far as your snowfall forecast, we could pick up a couple of inches in some of those higher elevations. And it's no surprise we've got snow, because look how chilly our temperatures have been across this region. Today, 40s for Detroit, 50s for Roanoke. All the rest of the country basically looking at warm weather. We've got even the potential for some of these record highs across the Southwest. We will nearly hit 100 degrees in Phoenix today, guys. 99 degrees in April versus the 40s across the Great Lakes. A bit of a different story when it comes to temperatures in multiple spots of the country today.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.